Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1035 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. I mean, Zoro vs. King. There's really not much else that you need to say. This chapter was cool as shit. You know, sometimes I feel as though people overcomplicate manga, myself included, right? You know, just sometimes the heart of manga is a guy does a sword attack that turns into a dragon, and another person counters that dragon by cutting it in half. Wow, great manga moment. But seriously, so Oda pretty well telegraphed this, but there was two things that Zoro needed in order to defeat King. First off, he needed to figure out how King's race worked. And then second, he needed to use Enma to defeat him, and that is exactly what we got. Aside from the drawings being very, very cool, there's also a lot of lore things in this that isn't yet fully explained that really has me excited to know more. But as far as how I took this, King's flames, while they appear on his back, he is essentially invulnerable. Zoro, even with Enma, could not do any damage to him. But when the flames do not appear on his back, he's faster for some reason, but he can also be damaged. I really think that some of the omissions here, very obvious omissions, Oda even drew attention to them in the chapter, imply something. Basically, right, like, we're looking for an explanation for King's race, and Zoro even asks King about his race, and King's like, well, you're going to be defeated anyway, so why would I explain anything to you? And then, at the conclusion of this chapter, we presume that Zoro defeated King. Therefore, King couldn't reveal the secrets about his race. That doesn't make sense. You would assume an explanation of King's race while King himself was still fighting. That's just how it normally goes down. You know, the hero is fighting against the villain has an ace up their sleeve, some sort of trick. The hero figures it out, and then the villain has a sort of monologue about, hey, this is my powers and this is how they work. But we didn't get that. We don't get an explanation for why King's flames work. I'm just telling you guys that at some point in time we have to know how King's powers work. That will be information dumped on us at some point in time. So obviously there's a couple ways that Oda could conceivably do this. First off, there could be somebody else who knows how King's powers work. Kaido or Queen. An idea that just sticks out in my mind is pretty well laid out in this chapter that King's race is incredibly rare and valuable. The world government wants to kill people like King. And we have CP0 here in this arc, agents of the world government. For a long time we speculated about King's, what he wore, his mask. Why did he hide what he looked like? He almost looked like an impaled down jailer. That was the theory from a long time ago that is obviously not true anymore. But we get a clearer answer in this chapter. Because he is a Lunarian, he hides his face, we presume, so that he does not attract the world government's attention. Right? At least there's a scene with fodder, and that's my takeaway from it. Zoro cuts off King's mask, and we see his face in all of its glory. And then some fodder also see it, and it's like, oh my gosh, he is a Lunarian. White hair, dark skin, wings. The world government is offering 100 million berries for any information on, and then King just straight up kills them. So the way that I understand this is that yes, King was a Lunarian, and yes, that was a rumor around that people could know of, like Big Mom, for instance. I assume that the world government had heard this rumor as well, but it was not something that was actually confirmed. And in the flashback, Kaido's flashback, King's flashback, you can see that Kaido rescued this Lunarian, but whether or not King was the same person from this world government complex, I guess it was unclear. You just kind of have to believe here that the world government wasn't certain, despite the flames, which seems to me to be a pretty dead giveaway. And so King decided to wear a mask to hide his identity, which is really not dissimilar to other races in the One Piece world. There's a common theme between all of them of running away from humans in various ways. This is another form of that. The Tantata went to Greenbit, where in Dressrosa, the island literally next door, they were thought to be myths. The fishmen were forced underwater, or hid, escaped underwater. The minks went up to Zou. You can see the non-humans in various ways try to separate themselves for fear of the celestial dragons, the world government, and humans. But anyway, the point is now King's mask is destroyed. King himself is likely defeated. CP0 is here. They should have an interest in collecting him And so they would also probably know about the Lunarians, and we may see a confrontation between these two factions at some point later where King could explain how his powers work. Or they could explain for us. Another thing which is probably worthy of mentioning, we got a reveal in the last 15 chapters about the sun god Nika. Sun god Nika, who pretty much everybody who saw the silhouette of him, he looked like a Shandorian. That's what he looked like, with fire as well. Maybe not on his back, but in his hair. And now we see King. What does King look like? He looks like a Shandorian. He looks almost exactly like Wiper. Even the tattoo that circles his eye, it's very, very reminiscent, but he also has these flames. So there could be a relationship between the sun god Nika, Lunarians, and King, which could also lead to some sort of reveal. But you know, what I think is most likely, is that we'll get information about King's race and how his fires work through Sanji. This was something that was low-key foreshadowed earlier in the battle. Queen basically commented on Sanji's fire leg and said, well, that's a really interesting trait. That's not normal for humans, but you can't be a Lunarian. There's a very real possibility that Sanji's flames are based on DNA derived from Lunarians like King. There is a lot of lore from mythology of humans stealing fire from the gods. The Lunarians are painted as god-like figures. Sanji, then having the traits of the Lunarian, would be like stealing fire from the gods. We also know that King is essentially invulnerable in certain states. Well, the Vinsmoke children have exoskeletons, which seems similar, so that could also be related. This would be the perfect time to reveal the nature, the secret behind Sanji's fire leg, if it relates to King, and would certainly explain why King didn't feel the need to explain it here and now, because Oda's gonna do it later. But yeah, just to throw shit against the wall, because why not? I mean, let's try to make sense of this. While the flame is out, King is essentially invulnerable. Then the flame disappears and he becomes faster. How, theoretically, hypothetically, how does this work? Also note here again, Sanji also has something about him increases his speed as well. So that's another connection. But a theory that I really like is that King's race relates in some way to devil fruit. And you'll know that in the story, devil fruits are depicted like souls, which looks a lot like fire. And devil fruits also relate to lineage factors or DNA, which relates to Sanji. Caesar Clown used lineage factors in order to create artificial devil fruits. And we learned about this just before we learned that Sanji is a genetic augment, that the judge and the Vinsmoke altered his children's DNA, likely also using lineage factors. But to get to the point, the theory is that the Lunarians have something to do with the creation of the devil fruit. That the devil fruit might have gotten its name from the Lunarians. The Lunarians with black wings, to sort of contrast the angels or the Skypeans' white wings, they're the devil or demons. If you guys recall, I have a very, very old theory where I basically speculate that devil fruits originate from space or from the moons, similar to where we now know the Lunarians, Luna equals moon, where the Lunarians were from. Or I guess here my language was a bit too strong, where we highly speculate that the Lunarians were from. It isn't yet confirmed that they're from the moons, but they're frickin' Lunarians. And I think that theory is really relevant after this chapter because essentially the premise of it was that Enel's fruit was inherited from the moons, the winged people from the moons. The endless verth that Enel sought out. He actually visited that moon in a cover story, and we can see it's technologically advanced, there's automata, but his fruit powers that city, and it leads to the speculation that that city originally ran on that devil fruit's power, meaning that before that devil fruit existed in the Sky Islands, it existed first on the moon. So maybe the devil fruits came from the moons, and then they took it with them down to the blue planet, and it never left their ownership. King here being similar to the Skypeans and the Shandorians as another different new kind of winged person who is likely from the moon. And so with this in mind, the Lunarian's flame becomes interesting. It's almost, to me, it seems like it might be an independent thing, right? Like, rather than being a part of King, maybe it's something like it cohabitates King's body like a devil fruit. There are a lot of parallels between King and the Skypians, such as Wiper. Just looking at them, right, you can see that there is some sort of connection that Oda wants in our brains. And so an important concept from the Skypiea arc and for the Shandians was their ancestors. They had ancestor trees. Nolan cut them down in the flashback. To present day, Wiper was trying to fulfill the destiny of his ancestors, Kalgura. And in present day, we can see King is from a race that is now extinct. So in a roundabout way, ancestors are important to King as well. So I kind of like to imagine this isn't a hugely supported theory, right? You see that as I say it, but just as an idea pulled out of the abyss, is like King's fire is the fire of his ancestor, like a soul or something like that, which he can draw upon to provide him speed and otherwise protects him. There's also an interesting connection here with the fire festivals. The fires rising up to the heavens allows the people to reach, the dead, their ancestors. Association between fire and the dead. And before the guy with the fire fruit, the Marimaro no Mi, one of the few major characters to have died. Fire also used to sort of describe will, like their fire still burned, their will still carries on, that's a thing. It's like spirit, which he can draw upon and use as armor in a very similar way as Haki, but yet different somehow. And so through this attunement with spirits or the souls of their ancestors maybe gave Lunarians a connections to Devil Fruit, which I don't want to enumerate, but is also connected, I believe, to spirits. And so it would also be fitting to drop this kind of reveal as well, because we're going to get an explanation of Devil Fruit soon from Vegapunk. So to have this in the background as like a connection to draw from makes sense. But I have more things I want to throw against the wall, right? So in this chapter, we see King use a fire attack, and it takes the form of a dragon. And immediately, that makes sense to everyone because King is loyal to Kaido. He showed his loyalty in this chapter, which was one of the better, it was a really good thing from this chapter. So immediately you think, oh, well, King used an attack that formed a dragon as a nod to Kaido, who he thinks is going to become the king of the pirates. And we also sort of get a trolly moment from Oda where, yeah, Zoro did slay a dragon in Wano, just not the one that you were thinking. But I want to remind you guys that the celestial dragons are called celestial dragons. We now have King, a Lunarian speculated to be from the moon, who has a fire that takes the form of a dragon. The celestial dragons removed the Lunarians from atop the red line. They live now where the Lunarians previously lived. The Lunarians were considered gods, like the celestial dragons are considered now. These celestial dragons have, for all intents and purposes, replaced them, and it's emphasized that they don't want any Lunarians around anymore. Basically, what I'm speculating is whether or not Lunarians are the OG, the original celestial dragons. Called that because they are celestial from the moon and have the flame of the dragon inside them, or something. This is obviously an endless rabbit hole where I could say a bunch of things that have no substance right now. But I just want this thought in your mind for you to take how you want. But I personally like the idea that there was a race of dragons that looked a lot like Kaido's Devil Fruit. And the Lunarians have some sort of connection with these lost dragons. The 20 kingdoms, which later became the new celestial dragons, stole their thunder, took their identity. But really, guys, I only wanted to bring this up as sort of wild headcanon because a lot of this just doesn't make sense. I mean, you have a fire that at some times you're totally invulnerable and sometimes you're faster. It needs some sort of crazy explanation to make sense in the first place. Is it going to be this answer? Probably not. But, something of this level. And that is incredibly exciting to me. But to get back on track here, we went on a little bit of a tangent. Basically, what we were talking about before is why didn't King reveal his powers? Or what are ways that Oda could handle this? And another way, of course, another person that could potentially reveal why King is special, how his powers work, is King himself. This is probably not going to be a popular theory because I personally think that King is very clearly defeated here. It's way different than last chapter with Queen where it was a bit more uncertain. I think, here, Zoro just defeated King, no doubt. but that doesn't mean that he can't come back later. Because the big question that we still have is how much longer until Kaido is defeated, and what happens after that. I said this after the last chapter, and I'm going to say it again here. We're fighting against a bunch of ancient zones. Queen has taken a shot from Big Mom and gotten back up. Ulti and Page 1 as well have shown a lot of durability, especially in a fight like Sanji versus Queen. It didn't really appear as though Queen had sustained that much damage, so Sanji basically one-shotted him. I just think that we should be aware of the possibility that some of these opponents, even after being defeated, knocked out, they get back up. And I even think that Oda might have alluded to this in some small way. When Sanji defeated Queen, he didn't just defeat him and knock him out, he sent him off of Onigashima. Why was it necessary to knock Queen off Onigashima? Might be because he's going to get back up, but if he does, he's still not going to be immediately on Onigashima. So he will re-enter the story, possibly, at a later time. So I wouldn't die on this hill, but I'm definitely considering whether or not King gets back up, maybe a confrontation with CP0. Also, I'm just going to say this, King has some serious ally for later vibes. Obviously, while Kaido is still alive, he's not going to be on the Straw Hat side, but just overall, his story is highly sympathetic. A theory confirmed by this chapter that I've been talking about so much that you almost forget that it was a theory, was that King and Kaido were experimented on by the world government. In the flashback, we can clearly see that they were both in Punk Hazard. His race, as well, is a thing that needs to be protected. I mean, that's Big Mom's whole ideal with Toddlin, bringing all the races together so that they can live in peace, but she doesn't have Lunarian. She wants a Lunarian. Also, Big Mom should be after King as well. Will that go somewhere? These things are definitely on my mind. But to bring this back to Sanji, because I don't think that I finished where I wanted to, there's something special about Sanji. You know that the Vinsmoke children's eyebrows swirl just like devil fruits? I personally don't think that this is a coincidence. And Queen pointed out that Sanji's fire leg was similar to Lunarians, who have some sort of magical, unexplained fire abilities. This is another reason for me to be curious about the potential connection between Lunarians and devil fruit. But yeah, overall, this was like the main takeaway that I had from the chapter. Cool drawings, and what is the lore behind King's Flame? Because I think that the answer, I think it's going to be revealed in this arc, it may not be, but whatever that answer is, it's going to be absolutely game-changing. And it wouldn't surprise me if Oda is layering many things in the background to set up this great reveal. And it is no coincidence that he chose not to explain King's ability when he had an obvious opportunity to do so. But the beginning of the chapter focused on Sanji. You guys know that I thought that Queen would get back up. He didn't. Is he knocked out? I mean, I guess it's sort of suggested to be that way, but he was knocked off the island, so I'm actually satisfied by that conclusion, because I think that it is reasonable, at least in my headcanon, right? Queen falls down to the ground, and he gets up in a minute or two, and that, for power scaling, that works. At the same time, you have pretty clear demonstration that right now, Sanji is... the Straw Hats are here. Without question, after this battle, they will not be a crew that you would want to mess with. They just have to survive whatever happens after this. I would say my only real disappointment about the whole Sanji thing is that we had all this excitement, this hype build up about him potentially losing his emotions, and no immediate payoff. But I'm just going to remind you guys, if anybody doesn't think that Oda's going to get back to this lack of emotions thing without tying it off, you don't have enough faith in him. Period. Yes, it's a bit disappointing that we don't have immediate payoff, immediate satisfaction for this, but that doesn't mean it isn't coming. So I patiently await for more on that front, particularly Sanji's promise to Zoro that if Zoro noticed that he has changed, to kill him. That needs to be a huge moment, and I think that it will be. Otherwise, it'll be anticlimactic. But anyway, we press forward in the battle. It's pretty clear that Oda is setting up the Straw Hats' victory. The Straw Hats are one by one defeating all of Kaido's crew, and then they will have a head-to-head with Kaido himself. The wild cards are Big Mom. They didn't anticipate Big Mom following them here. This is never something that they have accounted for at all. So that could be a twist that completely changes the stakes of the battle, where yes, the Straw Hats were strong enough to defeat Kaido, but because Luffy went to Whole Cake Island, because Sanji went to Whole Cake Island, they brought Big Mom here, that's why they're going to lose, or that's going to be the added stakes and drama. The twist, as seemingly everything has gone their way so far. And or they actually defeat Kaido, and then Calamity afterwards, CP0, there's still a lot of things left that are really excited. But in the short term here, we're just finishing off Kaido's crew. And it seems as though we don't have many more left to be beaten. And Oda's establishing the Straw Hats as a Yonko crew. But I'm curious as to what you guys think, whether you know something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.